My fiancé said he needed to find himself 2 weeks before our wedding. 2 months later, I saw him propose to someone else on Instagram. The caption called her his soulmate. The ring was bigger than the one he'd given me. I recognized the restaurant, the same place he'd told me we couldn't afford for our rehearsal dinner. I'd already lost the venue deposit, the dress alterations, and most of my dignity explaining to 150 guests why there'd be no wedding. My mom had stopped speaking to me, saying I must have done something to push him away. His mom blamed me for not being understanding enough of his spiritual journey. My friends got tired of hearing me cry after week 6. The text messages slowed down, then stopped completely. So I did what any rational person would do. I hired a wedding photographer anyway, booked the venue for a different date, ordered the flowers and the cake exactly as planned, sent out invitations for a celebration to mark the best day of my life. The invitations were elegant, expensive, identical to the ones I'd already sent. Then I married myself. I walked down the aisle alone in my altered dress, veil and all, while my cousin played the piano, the same songs we'd chosen together. My dad gave me away to nobody, his hand shaking on my arm. I said my own vows in front of 18 people who actually showed up, promised to love myself, honor myself, never abandon myself 2 weeks before I needed me most. I slipped a ring on my own finger and kissed my own hand. The photos were beautiful, professional, romantic, completely sincere. I posted them everywhere with captions about finally finding my soulmate, about how I'd been looking in all the wrong places when she was right there in the mirror, about how the best relationship I'd ever have was with myself. His family called it a cry for help. My mom called it the most embarrassing thing she'd ever witnessed. His friends sent screenshots to him, probably laughing over beers. I didn't care. For the first time in months, I felt lighter. I felt free. But then something strange started happening. Women I'd never met began messaging me, hundreds of them at first, then thousands of them, each one sharing a story about a man who'd left them shattered, then moved on immediately like they'd never existed. Each one asking how I'd found the courage, each one saying they wished they could do the same thing. Companies reached out wanting to sponsor my self-love journey. A lifestyle brand offered me money to promote their products. A publisher offered a book deal about modern relationships and radical independence. Morning shows wanted interviews. Podcasts wanted my story. The money started coming in, more than I'd ever made as a dental hygienist. I quit my job and started speaking at events, talking about betrayal and rebirth and choosing yourself when everyone else chooses to leave. The invitations kept coming. The checks kept clearing. My social media following exploded. Women called me brave. Men called me insane. I didn't care about either opinion. He sent a message 6 months later, congratulating me on monetizing my mental breakdown. Said I was pathetic for building a career off our failed relationship. I didn't respond. I blocked him and moved on. But then I received a package at my apartment. No return address. Plain brown box with my name written in careful handwriting. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten note. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from his new fiancée, the woman from Instagram, the soulmate. The note said 3 words. Watch this first. My hands shook as I plugged the drive into my laptop. The file was labeled simply, for you. I clicked it. The video started with her face, sitting in what looked like a hotel room. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her eyes were red and swollen. I don't know if you'll watch this, she said, but I need you to know the truth before it's too late. She explained how they'd met at a meditation retreat, how he'd told her he was recently single, healing from a toxic relationship, how she'd fallen for his vulnerability, his openness, his talk about finding his authentic self. They'd spent every day together for 2 weeks. By the end of the retreat, they were inseparable. He never mentioned you, she said. Not once. I didn't know about the wedding until I saw your posts online. She paused, wiping her eyes. At first, I thought you were crazy. Some bitter ex making a spectacle. But then I started noticing things. The lies came slowly at first. Small inconsistencies about where he'd been, who he'd been with, then larger ones. Money disappearing from her accounts. Charges on her credit card she didn't make. He'd convinced her to add him to her bank account because they were building a life together. He'd moved into her apartment because his lease was ending, and why pay for 2 places when they were getting married anyway? I confronted him last week, she said. He denied everything. Then I found the others. My stomach dropped. She'd hired a private investigator after finding a second phone in his car. The investigator discovered he'd been engaged to another woman before me, and another one before her. 5 engagements in 8 years, each one ending right before the wedding, each woman left with nothing but debt and broken dreams. He targets women with savings, she explained. Women with good credit, stable jobs, family money. He gets access to everything, then disappears right before the wedding when the deposits are lost and the damage is done. The video showed bank statements, screenshots of messages, photos of him with different women, each one wearing an engagement ring, each one looking blissfully happy, each one completely unaware they were part of a pattern. I've contacted the others, she continued. We're building a case, but I wanted you to know because you're the one who got away. You're the one who didn't let him destroy you. You turned your pain into something powerful. She leaned closer to the camera. There's more. He's been watching your accounts, tracking your speaking engagements, monitoring your income. I found notes in his desk drawer, plans. He's going to try to come back into your life, probably with some story about making amends, seeking closure. But really, he wants access to what you've built. The video ended with her email address and phone number. A message appeared on screen. Call me. We need to talk. I sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the blank screen where her face had been. My hands were still shaking. Then I called the number. She answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting. "Thank you for watching," she said. Her voice sounded different than in the video, steadier. "How long have you known?" I asked. "About him? 2 months. About you? Since the beginning. I recognized you from the self-wedding photos. I thought you were brave. Turned out you were smart. We talked for hours that night. She told me her name was Natasha. She was an accountant, methodical and precise, which is why she'd caught his inconsistencies faster than the others. She'd been documenting everything since the first lie, building a case without him knowing. The investigator found more than 5, she said. There are at least 8 women we can prove, probably more who never came forward. She told me about Bethany, who'd lost her entire inheritance from her grandmother. Roxanne, who'd declared bankruptcy after he maxed out credit cards in her name. Felicia, who'd attempted suicide after he cleaned out her retirement account and disappeared. Monroe, who'd lost custody of her kids when the financial devastation made her unable to pay for housing. Adelaide, who'd been left with $80,000 in wedding vendor debts. Each story more devastating than the last. Each woman believing she was the only one. Each woman convinced she'd done something wrong, pushed him away, failed somehow. "We want to go public," Natasha said. "Expose him. But we need someone with a platform. Someone people will actually listen to." I thought about my followers, the book deal I'd just signed, the speaking tour scheduled for next year, everything I'd built from the wreckage he'd left behind. What would going public mean? I asked. The truth, all of it. Names, faces, evidence, a coordinated release across all platforms. We make him infamous. We make sure every woman who searches his name finds us first. I didn't answer right away. I thought about the backlash, the scrutiny, the inevitable accusations that we were vindictive or lying. I thought about my mom who'd just started talking to me again, my career that was finally stable. "I'll do it," I said. The next month was spent gathering everything. Natasha coordinated with the other women. We created a shared drive with bank statements, emails, text messages, photos, police reports from the ones who'd tried to press charges. The investigator compiled a timeline spanning 12 years, showing his pattern across different cities, different identities, different versions of the same con. I met with each woman individually. Bethany lived 2 states away, working 2 jobs to rebuild what he'd taken. She showed me the letters from her grandmother, telling her to use the inheritance wisely. "She saved for 40 years, Bethany said. "He spent it in 6 months. Roxanne met me at a coffee shop near her new apartment. She'd lost her house, her car, her savings. "I thought declaring bankruptcy would be the end," she said. "But it was just the beginning of realizing how completely he'd destroyed my credit." Felicia was the hardest to meet. She was still in therapy, still recovering from the attempt. "He told me I was worthless," she whispered. "That no one would believe me if I tried to report him." I started to believe it too. Monroe's children were living with her sister while she tried to get stable housing. The judge asked why I couldn't keep a roof over their heads, she said. "How do you explain to a courtroom that someone systematically stole your ability to function?" Adelaide was a wedding planner, which made the irony particularly cruel. He knew exactly how to manipulate the vendors, the contracts, the deposits. By the time I realized what was happening, I was liable for everything. We documented every conversation. Every woman signed releases allowing their stories to be shared. The investigator verified every claim, every transaction, every detail. We wanted this to be airtight, undeniable. I posted the first video on a Tuesday morning. Just me, sitting in my apartment telling my real story. Not the empowering tale of self-marriage and independence. The truth. How I'd been manipulated, gaslit, and financially devastated by someone I'd trusted completely. How the self-wedding wasn't empowerment, it was survival. How I'd turned my pain into profit because I had no other choice. The video went viral within hours. Then the others came forward. Natasha posted next with all her documentation. Then Bethany, Roxanne, Felicia, Monroe, Adelaide. 6 women, 6 videos, 1 coordinated release. The comment section filled with thousands of women sharing similar experiences. Women who'd been engaged to men who vanished. Women who'd lost money to romantic partners. Women who'd been called crazy when they tried to warn others. But there were other comments too. People calling us liars. Saying we were vindictive exes trying to ruin an innocent man's life. That we'd coordinated this to extort him. That our evidence was fabricated. The story was picked up by local news first, then national outlets. Investigative journalists started digging. They found more women. Women who hadn't come forward because they were ashamed or scared or convinced no one would believe them. The total count reached 11 women. Over $600,000 stolen. A trail of destruction spanning 15 years across 6 states. He tried to disappear. Changed his number, deleted his social media, moved out of Natasha's apartment in the middle of the night, leaving only his clothes and a note that said, "You're all insane." But the internet is forever, and his face was everywhere. Every search of his name brought up our videos, our evidence, our warnings. Then my lawyer called. "He's suing you," she said. "Defamation. He's claiming everything you said is false and that you're leading a coordinated harassment campaign against him." The lawsuit demanded $2 million. More money than I'd made from my entire platform. He wanted everything I'd built, plus damages for emotional distress and loss of reputation. "Can he win?" I asked. My lawyer was quiet for a moment. "With the evidence you have? No. But defending against the suit will cost you $50,000 minimum. More if it goes to trial. And that's just your fees. The other women are being sued separately. 6 lawsuits. 1 for each of us who'd posted videos. Each demanding damages, each threatening financial ruin if we didn't recant publicly and pay him for the harm we'd caused. He's trying to bankrupt us into silence, I said. That's exactly what he's doing, my lawyer confirmed. The other women panicked. Bethany couldn't afford a lawyer. Monroe was already struggling financially. Adelaide's business was failing because of the media attention. We were being punished for speaking up, exactly as he'd planned. But something unexpected happened. The story gained traction. Women's advocacy groups took notice. Legal aid organizations offered assistance. A law firm specializing in harassment cases offered to represent all of us pro bono if we'd let them turn this into a larger case about predatory financial abuse. We can't promise you'll win, the lead attorney said during our first meeting, but we can promise you won't face this alone. The discovery process was brutal. His lawyers painted us as scorned women colluding to destroy an innocent man. They submitted character witnesses claiming he was generous and kind. They produced emails from women he'd dated who said he'd been nothing but respectful. They tried to make my self-wedding into evidence of mental instability, called my social media presence proof I was an attention seeker willing to fabricate stories for clicks, questioned whether I'd really been engaged to him at all, or if I'd made everything up for publicity. Meanwhile, my platform was crumbling. Speaking engagements were canceled. Brands pulled sponsorships, saying the legal controversy made me too risky to associate with. The book deal was put on hold pending the lawsuit's outcome. My income disappeared almost overnight. I had to move back in with my dad. The same dad who'd walked me down the aisle at my self-wedding, who'd stood beside me when everyone else called me crazy. He didn't say I told you so. He just helped me unpack my boxes and made dinner like nothing had changed. You did the right thing, he said one night while we washed dishes together. Even when the right thing costs you everything. But everything kept getting worse. My bank account was frozen due to the pending lawsuit. I couldn't get hired anywhere because my name brought up pages of legal drama. The other women were facing similar consequences. Bethany lost custody of her daughter temporarily. Her ex-husband used the media coverage to paint her as unstable, dragging her name through family court. Roxanne was fired from her accounting job for bringing negative attention to the firm. Felicia had a setback in her recovery and ended up hospitalized again. Monroe's sister threatened to keep her children permanently if she didn't drop the case. Adelaide's wedding planning business closed completely. We were being destroyed for trying to prevent him from destroying others. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Then, 8 months into the legal battle, Natasha called with news. The investigator found another woman, she said. Number 12. But this one's different. Her name was Camilla. She was a federal prosecutor's daughter, and she'd been documenting her relationship with him for over 2 years. She'd suspected something from the beginning and had kept everything. Every text message, every voicemail, every receipt, every promise. She'd been building a criminal case, working with the FBI to track his pattern across state lines. Why didn't she come forward sooner? I asked. She was waiting, Natasha said. She needed enough evidence for federal charges. Wire fraud, identity theft, financial exploitation. She needed a pattern that crossed state lines, multiple victims, proof of intent. She used us, I said slowly. She knew about us and waited while we suffered. She built a case, Natasha corrected. A real one. Criminal, not civil. Prison time, not just settlements. I didn't know how to feel about that. Grateful that someone had been working toward real justice. Angry that she'd watched us struggle while gathering evidence. Both felt true simultaneously. Camilla agreed to meet with all of us. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 26, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from always being the smartest person in the room. She spread documents across the conference table like she was presenting to a jury. I've been tracking him for 28 months, she said. I knew about some of you from his financial records. Others I found through the investigators' reports after you went public. Why didn't you warn us? Monroe asked. Her voice was shaking. Camilla's expression didn't change. Because 1 or 2 victims isn't enough for federal prosecution. I needed a pattern. Multiple victims across multiple states over multiple years. I needed evidence of systematic fraud, not individual bad relationships. We're not bad relationships, Bethany said. We're crimes. Exactly, Camilla agreed. Which is why I waited. I needed enough to put him away for decades, not months. I needed to make sure that when this went to trial, there would be no possibility of him walking away. She showed us what she'd compiled. Bank records showing systematic patterns of theft, emails where he'd used different names with different women, phone records showing he'd been engaged to multiple women simultaneously, travel records showing he'd moved between cities right after draining accounts. He's been doing this since he was 22, she said. Maybe earlier, but that's as far back as I can prove. He's stolen from at least 18 women that I can document. The total is probably over $1 million. The room went silent. 18 women. $1 million. Over 15 years of systematically destroying lives. The FBI arrested him this morning, Camilla continued. He's being charged with wire fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation. The civil suits against you will likely be dropped once the criminal charges become public. I should have felt relieved, vindicated, but mostly I felt numb. Justice was coming, but it couldn't undo what had already been done. It couldn't give Bethany back her inheritance, or Monroe her children, or Felicia the years she'd lost to trauma. What happens now? I asked. He'll likely take a plea deal to avoid trial, Camilla said. Based on the evidence, he's looking at 20 to 40 years. The civil suits against you should collapse once his criminal attorney advises him to drop them. You might even be able to sue him for malicious prosecution. With what money? Adelaide asked bitterly. He's probably hidden everything. Camilla slid another folder across the table. The FBI is seizing his assets, including offshore accounts he didn't think anyone knew about. There's approximately $430,000 that will be divided among documented victims. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. Bethany started crying. Monroe put her face in her hands. Adelaide just stared at the folder like it might disappear. 2 days later, his lawyers dropped the defamation suits against all of us. A week after that, he took a plea deal. 25 years in federal prison. Restitution to be paid from seized assets. A permanent record ensuring he'd never access credit or bank accounts without oversight again. The media coverage shifted. Suddenly, we weren't vindictive exes. We were survivors. Brave women who'd exposed a predator. The same outlets that had questioned our credibility were now praising our courage. But the damage was already done. My social media following had dropped by 60% during the lawsuit. The book deal was officially canceled. Speaking engagements had dried up. I'd spent 8 months unemployed, living with my dad, watching my savings evaporate on legal fees despite the pro bono representation. The other women were in similar situations. Bethany was still fighting for custody. Roxanne was working retail after losing her career. Felicia was in intensive therapy. Monroe had her kids back but was living in a shelter. Adelaide had declared bankruptcy. We'd won, but winning looked a lot like losing. Natasha organized a dinner after the sentencing. All of us together for the first time without lawyers or cameras or purposes beyond just being together. We met at a small restaurant far from anyone who might recognize us. To survival, Natasha said, raising her glass. We drank to survival, to justice, to the end of a nightmare that had consumed years of our lives. But the toast felt hollow. We were free from him, but we weren't free from what he'd done. As dinner ended, Camilla pulled me aside. I'm sorry, she said, for waiting so long, for using your pain to build a better case. Did it work? I asked. He pled guilty to everything, took a deal to avoid trial where even more would have come out. He'll be 70 before he's eligible for parole. Then it was worth it, I said. I meant it, and I didn't. The conviction mattered, but it didn't give me back the year I'd lost to legal battles. It didn't undo the damage to my reputation or my career or my relationship with my mom, who still barely spoke to me. I drove home that night thinking about justice and revenge, and whether they were the same thing, wondering if punishment for him equaled healing for us, knowing that the answer was no, but not knowing what else to want. My apartment was small and plain, nothing like the life I'd built during my brief time as someone people listened to, but it was mine, paid for with honest work at a dental office that hired me despite the Google results, filled with things I actually needed, free from performance. I made tea and sat on my balcony watching the city lights. Tomorrow I'd go back to work, clean teeth, take x-rays, listen to people complain about flossing. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't meaningful, but it was real. My phone buzzed. A message from Bethany. She'd gotten full custody back. Monroe had found stable housing. Roxanne had been hired at a nonprofit. Felicia was celebrating 6 months of stability. Adelaide was consulting for a legal firm on financial abuse cases. We were all rebuilding, slowly, painfully, imperfectly, taking the pieces he'd shattered and making something new. Another message came through, from an unknown number, just a photo. Him in an orange jumpsuit, looking hollow and defeated. Below it, a message from Camilla. Thought you'd want to see. I looked at the photo for a long time, tried to feel something. Satisfaction, vindication, relief. But mostly I felt tired. Tired of carrying this. Tired of letting him occupy space in my thoughts. Tired of defining myself by what he'd done. I deleted the photo, blocked the number, made a choice right there to let it go. Not forgive, not forget, but release. Release the anger that had fueled me for so long. Release the need for his suffering to match mine. Release the hope that his punishment would somehow make me whole. Because wholeness didn't come from convictions or sentences or revenge. It came from choosing yourself, over and over, even when choosing yourself meant walking away from the fight. The wedding dress still hung in my closet, preserved from the self-marriage ceremony. I pulled it out and looked at it one final time. Remembered walking down that aisle alone, feeling simultaneously ridiculous and powerful. Remembered the laughter and the pity, and the way I hadn't cared because I was surviving the only way I knew how. I donated the dress to a charity shop, along with the veil and the photos and the version of myself who'd needed that performance to feel valuable. That chapter was over. Months passed. I settled into a routine that didn't involve court dates or lawyers or journalists asking for comments. Work, therapy, dinners with my dad, occasional coffee with the other women who understood without needing explanation. My mom finally called one afternoon. She'd seen the news about his sentencing. I'm sorry, she said, for not believing you sooner. It's okay, I said. But it wasn't. Not really. Some wounds don't heal completely just because time passes. I was embarrassed, she continued, by the wedding, by the posts. I thought you were having some kind of breakdown. I didn't understand that you were fighting to survive. We talked for over an hour. It didn't fix everything, but it was a beginning. My cousin called a few weeks later. She was getting married. I know it might be hard, she said, but I'd really love it if you came, maybe stood beside me. I thought about saying no, about protecting myself from the memories and the comparisons and the inevitable questions, but I also thought about how she'd played piano at my self-wedding when everyone else called me crazy. I'll be there, I said. The wedding was beautiful, small and simple and real. I stood beside her and held her flowers and tried not to think about my own almost wedding, about the dress I'd worn and the vows I'd said and the man who'd left me shattered. At the reception, someone asked if I was married. I almost told them about the self-wedding, about the viral videos and the platform I'd built and lost, but instead I just said, No, but I'm doing okay, because I was. Not healed, not whole, but okay. Making peace with the fact that survival doesn't look like triumph, that healing isn't linear, that justice doesn't erase pain. I saw Natasha occasionally. She'd started a support group for financial abuse survivors. It met Tuesday nights in a community center. I went once, listening to stories that sounded like ours. Women who'd been conned, manipulated, left with nothing. You should share, Natasha said afterward. I don't know what I'd say, I admitted. The truth, she said. That it happened. That you survived. That surviving is enough. I started going regularly, not as a speaker, just as someone who'd been through it. Sometimes I shared. Sometimes I just listened. It helped more than I'd expected. A year after the sentencing, a journalist reached out. She was writing a book about financial predators and wanted to include our story. Only if you're comfortable, she said. But I think it's important. I thought about saying no, about keeping this chapter closed, but I also thought about the women in that support group, the ones who'd never reported, the ones who thought they were alone. I'll do it, I said, but on my terms. The book came out 18 months later. It told our stories accurately, with dignity, without sensationalizing the trauma. My chapter was called The Woman Who Married Herself, and it told the whole truth. The wedding, the platform, the lawsuit, the collapse, the survival. The book didn't go viral. It sold modestly, got decent reviews, and then faded into obscurity. But it existed. A record of what happened. Proof that we'd spoken up, fought back, survived. I got messages occasionally from women who'd read it, thanking me for telling the truth, for showing that survival doesn't look like Instagram posts and empowerment speeches, that sometimes survival looks like moving back in with your dad and taking whatever job will hire you and rebuilding from nothing. My platform never recovered. The followers who left didn't come back. The book deal stayed canceled. The speaking engagements remained rare. I was no longer the woman who married herself. I was just someone who'd survived something terrible and lived to talk about it. But I was okay with that. Better than okay, actually. Because the platform had been built on performance, on turning pain into content, and I didn't want to perform anymore. I wanted to just exist. Quietly, honestly, imperfectly. I ran into his mom once at a grocery store 2 years after the sentencing. She looked older, worn down. She saw me and froze. I'm sorry, she said, for not believing you. For blaming you. I nodded. Didn't say it was okay because it wasn't. But I appreciated the acknowledgement. He's appealing the sentence, she continued. Says the evidence was obtained illegally, that he was coerced into the plea deal. Of course he is, I said, not surprised. Not even angry anymore, just tired. Will you testify if it goes back to trial? She asked. Yes, I said. Every time, for as long as it takes. She nodded and walked away. I continued shopping, buying groceries for dinner with my dad. Normal, mundane, real. The appeal was denied 6 months later. His sentence stood, 25 years. The other women and I didn't celebrate. We just acknowledged it and moved on. Because that's what survival looked like. Not triumph, not victory, just continuing. Getting up each day. Working, healing, connecting. Building lives that didn't revolve around him or what he'd done. Bethany got remarried. Monroe's kids started calling her every night. Roxanne got promoted at the nonprofit. Felicia published a memoir about surviving. Adelaide opened a small consulting business helping people understand predatory contracts. We all rebuilt. Differently than before. Smaller, quieter, more carefully. But we rebuilt. On the 5-year anniversary of my canceled wedding, I went back to the beach where the self-wedding photos had been taken. I stood in the same spot, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of a dress. No photographer, no audience, no purpose except to remember. I thought about the woman I'd been then, desperate to prove she was okay, to show the world she didn't need him, to monetize her pain because at least that made it mean something. I understood her better now. She'd been doing her best with what she had, fighting to survive in the only way that made sense at the time, but I wasn't her anymore. I'd lost the platform and the followers and the brief moment of mattering. I'd been dragged through legal battles and media scrutiny, and the slow realization that justice doesn't heal you. I'd survived anyway, built something smaller but more solid. A life that didn't depend on performing or proving or turning trauma into content. Just a life. Simple and real, and mine. My phone buzzed. My dad asking what time I'd be home for dinner. My cousin sending photos of her baby. Bethany sharing a funny story from her day. Small connections. Quiet love. Nothing Instagram-worthy. Nothing monetizable. Nothing that would make a good story. Just life. And after everything, that was more than enough. I took one last look at the ocean, then walked back to my car. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful. I didn't take a photo. I just watched it, present in the moment, not thinking about how to frame it or caption it or share it. Some things are meant to just be experienced. Some moments don't need documentation. Some survival doesn't need an audience. I drove home, made dinner with my dad, watched a movie we'd both seen before. Normal, peaceful, real. And somewhere in a federal prison, he was serving year 5 of 25. The conviction stood. The evidence was overwhelming. The pattern was undeniable. Justice had been served, even if justice couldn't undo the damage. We'd all moved on, even if moving on looked different than we'd imagined. And I'd married myself once, in a moment of desperate defiance. But now I was just living with myself, learning to like her, choosing her every day, not dramatically or publicly, but quietly and consistently. The woman who'd walked down that aisle alone had been trying to prove something. The woman I'd become didn't need to prove anything anymore. She just needed to keep going, to show up for herself and the people she loved, To build a life worth living, not worth posting. And that finally was enough.